Hello, Asaikum. We were learning about the thoracic wall, and one thing I didn't mention in my previous lecture that was about sternum. That these lectures are from Snell Anatomy Review Book. So let's proceed. Today our topic is ribs. The ribs are extremely lightweight but highly resilient, and they can absorb lots of force because they are mean to protect the internal organs of the chest. So they have to be very resilient. These are 12 in numbers, means there are 12 pairs of ribs. 12 this side and 12 this side, all of which are attached posteriorly to the thoracic vertebra. Let me show you. All of the ribs are attached to the thoracic vertebrae of the corresponding numbers. Means rib 1 is attached to T1, thoracic vertebra 1, and T2, T3, T4, T5, and so on, T12. So all the ribs are attached to the vertebra of the corresponding numbers, thoracic vertebrae of the corresponding numbers. There are two types of classifications or two types of names that are given to the ribs. One is one naming or one classification is on the basis of attachment to the sternum, and another classification is on the basis of anatomical features of the ribs. When you see on the basis of attachment to the sternum, you will find two types of the ribs, true ribs and false ribs. You can say the upper 7 pairs of the ribs are true ribs that are attached to the sternum by their costal cartilage. By their own costal cartilage, they are attached to the sternum. Let me show you how. This is rib 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All the 7 ribs are attached to the sternum with their own costal cartilage. Means you have to arise from the thoracic vertebrae and you have to attach with the sternum with your own costal cartilage to be a true rib. This is the definition of true rib, that they arise from the thoracic vertebrae and attach to the sternum with their own costal cartilage. But what is the false rib? The false rib is that it will arise from the thoracic vertebrae, but it will not attach to the sternum with its own costal cartilage. This is rib number 8, 9 and 10. These are attaching to the sternum indirectly. The costal cartilage of the rib 8, 9 and 10 are attaching to the costal cartilage of the rib immediately higher to them, and then they will connect to the rib 7, and the costal cartilage of rib 7 will indirectly connect the rib number 8, 9, 10 to the sternum. So these are false ribs. Rib number 11 and 12 is also false rib, but they are also called floating ribs. They are false ribs as well as floating ribs. So floating rib is a subclass of false ribs. These floating ribs are so named because they seem to be like floating because they do not attach to the sternum or costal cartilage of the higher ribs, but they end in the musculature of the abdomen. They end in the musculature of the abdomen. They are small. They are very short ribs. They start from the thoracic vertebrae and end in the musculature of the abdomen. They do not reach to the sternum or the costal cartilages of the higher ribs. Now we learn the categorization or classification of ribs on the basis of attachment to the sternum. What was the other categorization of the ribs? That was on the basis of anatomical features. On the basis of anatomical features, the ribs are classified as typical ribs and atypical ribs. What is a typical rib? A typical rib has head, neck, tubercle, shaft and angle. This is the head of the rib. This is tubercle. This is angle. This is body or the shaft of the rib, costal groove and articulation with the costal cartilage. From here it will articulate with the costal cartilage, and that costal cartilage will ultimately articulate with the sternum. This is the typical anatomy of the typical rib. Okay, let me first explain about the typical rib. Let me show you how it articulates with the vertebrae. This picture is showing the articulation of the rib with the vertebrae. This is head of the rib, this head articulating with vertebrae. The head of the rib has two facets. One that is larger one that articulates with the vertebrae of the corresponding number, and the smaller one articulates with the costal facet of the body of the vertebra that is immediately superior to that vertebra. See, one rib is articulating with two vertebrae, and this is tubercle. It has a facet also. And what is this facet for? This articulates with the transverse process of the vertebra. This is tubercle, and the tubercle's facet is articulating with the transverse process of the vertebra. This is neck of the rib. Neck of the rib has just one function. It connects the head with the body of the rib. This is angle of the rib, where the rib deviates. This is costal cartilage, and this is sternum. The body or shaft of the rib will be thin, flat and curved, and it will have a costal groove. This here is the costal groove. Costal groove offers the protection and path to the neurovascular bundles. And this angle that is also called costal angle that provides the attachment of the deep back muscles. See, that was all about the typical rib. Any rib that has the deviation of that typical anatomy of the rib will be called atypical rib. If you see the Snell anatomy review, you will only find the rib 1 as atypical rib. They are only talking about rib 1. Rib number 1 is described as atypical rib because it is short than other ribs, and it is wider, it is more thicker, more stronger than other ribs. It is more curved, and it only articulates with one vertebrae, that is thoracic 1, T1. And rib 2 is not called typical rib, it is atypical rib because it has large tuberosity that allows it to attach with the serratus anterior muscle. So it has a large tuberosity, and this makes it different from other ribs, normal anatomical features of other ribs. Now come to the rib number 11 and 12. They do not have tubercles because a typical rib should have a tubercle, and the rib number 11 and 12, they also do not attach to the sternum. Rib number 10 is considered as atypical rib because articulates with only one thoracic vertebra, vertebra number 10. It is all about the ribs today. In the next lecture we will see more about the thoracic wall. Then Khuda Hafiz.